Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Mind the Music episode number 6, the podcast where I ramble on about things that I've done about music in order to help people improve their goals in music. Usually I talk about production tips like breakdowns. Occasionally I will also talk about things like my stuff, and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing today because there's a lot of things hidden within the latest album that I've released that I'd like to talk about. This is not just going to be a promo podcast where I talk about the latest album that I've released. I'm going to be talking about everything behind each of the tracks that I've released. So, for a bit of context, I have recently released the album Blood, Sweat and Fears. It is an 8-track EDM album with some Electro-House and some big room, featuring the talents of Black Winter and Decca and obviously myself. And each track actually tells a little bit of a story. So I thought I'd talk about each of the tracks individually and then talk about what the album is meant to represent as a whole. You know, what the cover art of the album is meant to represent, because it's a picture of me with my hands or my face in my hands, sort of covering myself up like I'm upset or angry about something. So I'm going to explain what that means once I go through all of the tracks. So, without further ado, we're going to start off with the first track in the album, Saint. Now, I released Saint on the channel a little while before I actually finished the album. Saint is the first track in the album, and it is actually my favourite track. It was probably mixed the best out of everything. It's a little short. I thought it could have been a bit longer, but it is still, especially with what I did with the vocals, it's still a really enjoyable track to listen to. So the lyrics in the track focus on not wanting to make mistakes in a relationship, in fear of damaging one another in that relationship permanently, even though the reality is that everyone in the relationship will make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes because it's human to do so, and any damage caused in the relationship is only temporary, so long as you're both willing to repair the relationship, and you'll do that if you love each other. So it's as simple as that, really. That's why he says, or at least that's why I say, I'm trying my hardest not to make mistakes, because obviously I don't want to make mistakes. I don't want to be the one to damage the relationship. If there's anyone I wouldn't want to harm, it's the person I'm in a relationship with. I wouldn't want to upset them, but I have to make them aware that I'm not a saint. I make mistakes all the time. Sometimes I'm a complete idiot and I forget things, and that's absolutely fine. I'm doing my best to work on the relationship. I'm doing my best to make it as good as I can possibly be, but I will always make mistakes, and that's just something that happens, and that's actually a good test of how strong the relationship is. If I made like one single mistake and the relationship was over just because of a silly little like error or mishap, that would be kind of ridiculous. But the best kind of relationships, in my opinion, they're forged out of how much you want to stay with each other despite how many mistakes and how many arguments or mishaps you make. But yeah, moving on from that, that's what the lyrics of the track represent. But Saint in general, there's a reason why Saint is the first track in the album. It's not just because it's my favourite track. It's also because Saint, as a track in general, represents the idea of expectations. It's what you and most people would expect the album to sound like. When you listen to that first track, you're not sure what it is you're going to expect from the album. You don't know what it is I've made. And that first track is a good sort of expectation, a sort of leeway into the rest of the album. So that's what people would expect from the album. So the next track in the album is Underdog, which is very, very similar to a track that I did before called Beholder. It's like a big room sort of style. Underdog mainly focuses on the idea of assumptions about how good a new track is going to be based on the artist. You might see someone like me with 5,000 monthly listeners at this current time and think, oh, he's probably not that bad. And, you might listen to someone like, another artist who has like 50 or 60 monthly listeners, and that's obviously not that great. But someone with that many monthly listeners, a lot of people might look at that and assume that they're not doing very well, their music is not that great. And that's true for some people. That's the reason why some people have less than like 10 monthly listeners, because their music just isn't that great. But sometimes you get people that have that many monthly listeners, 10 or 20 or 30, and their music is absolutely phenomenal. It's just that they don't promote their own material. They just put it on Spotify and they don't really do anything about it. So that was, I think, a perfect example for that would have been Black Winter. I've mentioned him a lot in like previous podcasts. But basically, I remember when I first started working with him, he had very, very few monthly listeners, the same as I did. He had like 10, 20 monthly listeners on Spotify, but he had a pretty big discography. And, you know, he had a lot of great stuff as well. A lot of his tracks were really interesting, really energetic EDM tracks that you would expect from someone like Kashmir or Rehab or even Nom de Strip, you know, a lot of artists that I look up to. But he didn't have that many monthly listeners. So a lot of people would look at that and assume that he wasn't very good and they wouldn't bother listening to him, which is a really poor way to approach something. That's just the whole idea of underdog. Underdog as a term means they are not very highly ranked as a person. If a person is an underdog in a competition, for example, that means they're at the bottom, but they could actually win the competition if they end up climbing. So underdog is meant to represent, even if I'm not a particularly big artist, the track itself is actually really good. And if a lot of people realize that and start listening to it, it could eventually climb to the top, and I'll stop being an underdog and start being at the very top, which would be amazing. Now, underdog as a track in general, the actual mix was okay, but the master was not quite what I wanted. For some reason, I wasn't able to master the track as well as I wanted to. It wasn't as loud as I wanted it to be. Saint was probably the best mastered track. It was definitely the loudest and definitely the best mixed, in my opinion. But for some reason, I couldn't quite get Underdog to get on the same level, even though I did actually go back and change the master, and I just couldn't get it to be as loud as I wanted to, so I'm not really sure what that was all about. The next track in the album is Boss. Now, Boss, the idea of Boss is that it focuses on throwing away a great track because an artist just decides to change his style, which is exactly why Boss was never actually released on the channel or released as a single in general. Boss was done a few months ago. Me and Black Winter worked on Boss, and we never actually released it when we finished it. We sort of just did it, and it was just there. And I wanted to release it a bit later on. I said this would be a really good track for us to release. But Black Winter said no. He said he didn't want to release the track because he'd sort of moved on from that genre of Electro-House and Big Room, and he was more focused on Deep House. And I was in kind of deep disagreement as to, you know, why he didn't want to release it. I know that it didn't represent him now, but he was working on Deep House at the same time that he was working on Electro-House stuff. And it was still a really good track. It would still just be more beneficial to actually release Boss as it was. I thought it was an amazing track, and right now it's actually doing the best. It's doing better than Saint, and it's doing better than everything else in the album. So it was a no-brainer to release the track. Even if he had, you know, moved on from that particular genre, it was still a good idea to release that sort of genre. Even though I've never really done hip-hop or lo-fi before, I've still produced and released some of those genres. So it's no reason to hold you back just because you work on a different genre. So eventually I was able to convince him that it was good enough to release. So I thought, okay, let's put that in the album. That would be a really good track to have in the album. And that's basically what we did. The next track in the album is Ghost God, The Resurrection. Now, you guys are probably very familiar with Ghost God if you've been on the channel for a while. That's probably because I have milked the hell out of this particular track. We've done Ghost God, we've done Scrap God, which was a combination of Ghost God and Scrap Freak, which didn't really go very well. We did a mega mix based on the Ghost God tracks. We did Ghost God Retro remix. We got Dragon Tree to make a remix of Ghost God. And now I decided to bring back Ghost God in the form of a new genre that featured Decca to put his own spin on it, and he did, because his genre is more progressive house. It's more sort of like psy, and it was definitely different. You can tell it's very different to the previous ones, but having both of us work on it at the same time created a really nice, really interesting sound, especially in the breakdown. And that's one of the things I've said before I love doing with collaborations. I love blending together styles and making something really new and really interesting, really unique, and we definitely achieve that with Ghost God, The Resurrection. What this track focuses on is revitalizing old material that some might consider dead and probably shouldn't be brought back. And this is perfect for Ghost God because Ghost God is old material. It's not very good material, albeit, all things considered. So in the first episode of Mind the Music, I did actually talk about Ghost God, and I tried to answer the question why I was basically milking that particular track. Why was I so obsessed with that particular track? Why did I reuse it so many times? And towards the end of it, I didn't really come to a very strong conclusion, but I think now that I've had a chance to think about it again, the answer is actually really simple. It's because when I did the original Ghost God, the idea was really interesting, but it wasn't executed very well at all. The mix wasn't very good, and the drop could have been way better. I think it was just a lot better in my head, but in reality, it actually wasn't that good. Then when I tried to bring it back later on, I still couldn't make it better. Scrap God failed, and I tried to revitalize it like 3 times, because you can see in the Upgrades EP that's Scrap God V4 is there, but I just couldn't seem to make the track any better, even with the 2 sort of remixes, the retro remix that I did just sort of on the side to pad out the channel, and the dubstep remix that Dragon Tree did, which was amazing. I wasn't happy that the genre, or not the genre, I wasn't happy with the track. I wasn't happy with what had happened. I just hated looking at these new editions of Ghost God and thinking, I've not really done very well here. I've sort of failed in trying to make it a better track. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I don't care. I'm going to bring it back. And somebody in the past did suggest to me not to bring back Ghost God because they considered it to be dead. And ultimately, yes, I could leave a lot of material behind. I've done the same thing for Rush. I mean, I left a lot of it behind, but I did bring it back for the Diamond Edition because it was for the 250 subscribers special. But honestly, I can do what I want, and I wanted to bring back Ghost God because I knew that if I did it with Decca, he would be able to make it a lot better with me, and I also knew that I'd be able to release it in the album, and that made a lot of sense as well because it means I'd be collaborating with like at least 2 people in the album, which is something that I really wanted to begin with. I really wanted to make an album where I could actually collaborate with people and like have people as part of the album, so people would click on the album, they would obviously see my name, but they would also see some other names as well and be like, oh, he's collaborated with some people, I guess this could be really interesting. So that's kind of the direction I took with Ghost God the Resurrection. I really enjoyed the track. I think the mix is really interesting. I was really happy with how I managed to mix the Ghost God's vocal parts, because when I did that in the original tracks it was good, but in this one I made it a lot better. It was a lot cleaner as well. The mix in general is just really good. So yeah. The next track in the album is Sludge Lord. Now, Sludge Lord isn't particularly special, even though it was actually mastered really well, in my opinion. Sludge Lord is heavily based on a track by Nondescript called Big Nobbler, I think, which is a really funny name, but it's really enjoyable to listen to, and it's really simple as well, which was the direction I took with Sludge Lord. The main focus of Sludge Lord is I was basically trying to bring back a dying genre, because Electro-House is definitely not as popular as what it used to be, and it kind of saddens me, really. I'm going to get to this a little bit later, but yeah, Sludge Lord is just meant to sort of revitalize the Electro-House genre and how interesting it can be and how fun it can be to listen to. The next track in the album is Tail. Now, Tail is a track that I released on the channel with Black Winter a little while ago, and it was a really interesting track, and it has a little bit of an interesting story behind it. So the story behind Tail is that I basically wanted to help Black Winter bring back an idea that he almost scrapped, which would have been a missed opportunity. So I remember ages ago that he was sort of sending me little MP3 samples of, you know, drops that he was working on, and he sent me this one in particular, which had loads of like flutes and stuff and like sort of whistly sounds, very breathy, sort of airy sounds, and it sounded really, really interesting. I was like, you gotta develop this. And a few months went past, and he didn't develop it. And I brought it back to his attention. I said, did you end up finishing this? And he said no. And I could have just left it there. I could have just not talked about it any further. I could have just said, yeah, okay, cool, and just left it. But I didn't want to, because I saw a lot of potential in this particular track. I saw a lot of potential just with that drop sample that he sent me alone. I wanted to develop it into something new because I knew that people would really enjoy it. So I said to him, look, if you could send me the stems for the track, I will work on it. I will attempt to develop it into a full track. And that's exactly what we did together. So that was the project. The actual development of the project was mostly on my end. I finished it, I mixed it, I mastered it, and the final track that I released in the album was my master. And ultimately, I really enjoyed it, and a lot of people enjoyed Tail as well, because it was an unusual take to Big Room. I think it's, well, I feel like Tail is more like an Electro-House track, if anything. Big Room and Electro-House have a lot of similarities. Electro-House is typically more aggressive and a bit more minimal, a bit less sort of crowdy. But personally, I thought Tail, the actual like drop melody that was used, was really interesting, and a lot of people really enjoyed it. And that was ultimately that was my main goal. If I left it behind, if I had chosen not to work on it with him, because he didn't want to work on it or because he sort of forgot about it, then we wouldn't have got the reactions that we got from people. We wouldn't have had such an interesting and unique sound to put into the album. But we did because of the decision that I made. So yeah, that's basically the story behind Tail. The next track in the album is Shards. Now, the main focus behind Shards, or the main sort of message behind Shards, is if you're working on a track with a really good idea and you've almost finished it, you need to finish it. Shards was basically a track that I was working on for nearly half a year, and I almost finished it, but I just sort of left it behind and just didn't bother working on it for like half a year. I had a lot of stuff actually in the track. I had so many different elements, loads of percussion, loads of drop ideas. It was very well balanced in my opinion. And I ended up getting to the end of the breakdown, which by the way actually uses the melody from Bloodhounds, fun fact. But yeah, I finished that part and I had like the main melody just before the second build. Okay, so it was like the little bit of breakdown before the second build, and there was nothing there at the time because I couldn't figure out what to do, even though what I eventually added was like a really simple idea. All I did was just add in a couple more percussive elements, then add the second build, then add another drop, then add an outro, and that was it. And that's all I needed to do. But for some reason, I just kept procrastinating really hard and just not finishing the track. If you got a track that's nearly finished, and it's so easy to actually finish it, then you just got to go back and finish it. But I was just procrastinating on this particular track so hard. I don't know what was the matter with me. I just didn't want to finish it. So that's kind of what Shards focuses on. If you have a track that's nearly done, go finish it. And the last track in the album is the Golem remix, which is a dubstep remix of Golem in a slightly different key. I think it's a single semitone above the original key. And basically the main focus of this remix was I wanted to remix Golem in a genre that was dying, like for example dubstep, because dubstep is definitely not as popular as what it used to be, to remind people how good it can be to take a track like Golem and completely redo it in a genre that is dying, to show off how good it can sound as a dubstep track. And it just highlights to me why genres like that just shouldn't die when you can create something absolutely phenomenal with these dying genres like dubstep. And that's exactly what I did. I mean, I managed to finish the dubstep remix of Golem in about a day, and I was pretty impressed by that. It was quite simple to do because I had all the elements I needed and everything still sounded nice and clean. I didn't have to clean anything up really. But no, I absolutely love the sound of Golem, and I wanted to remix the original for quite a while. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. In fact, I did actually want somebody else to remix it, but nobody did. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to remix Golem in a new key. And that's exactly what I did with the dubstep remix, which I thought went really well. I thought it was mixed quite well. And I absolutely loved the breakdown of the remix. The way the sort of crowd comes together reminds me a lot of Skrillex, and the way he was able to add like crowd sounds and sort of like, it makes you feel like you're there in a festival. It makes you really feel like you can feel the atmosphere of the people. And that's what I was trying to achieve. And I think I did that quite well with the remix. Covering the album as a whole, why is the track called Blood, Sweat and Fears? What does it represent? Now, a lot of people might consider EDM a particularly, well, not dead, but a dying genre, because there's no way that Big Room or House or Electro-House or other similar genres are as big as what they used to be. Electro-House and Big Room are the two primary genres that I make. But they're definitely not as big as what they used to be, which is what saddens me the most. Other genres like Deep House and Slap House are definitely starting to grow, and I do like those genres, and I have made both of those genres before, but I much prefer working on more energetic and more aggressive genres like Electro House and Big Room. Unfortunately, whenever I post my music, sometimes I get people who comment on my stuff and they say, you know, this really gives me 2015, 2016 vibes, or, you know, you're bringing back stuff from 2015. I'm not bringing anything back. This is something that I'm making now. I'm not making this music in 2015. I'm not bringing anything back from 2015 because this genre wasn't dead until now. This genre hadn't just disappeared off the face of the earth. People have still been making electro house and big room for ages. It's just not as popular as what it used to be. So I'm not bringing back 2015. I'm making 2021. I'm creating a genre in this time period right now. I'm not traveling to the past and bringing back stuff from back then. It's like people seem to forget that people are still making rock and roll and rock tracks, despite the fact that technically that's very outdated. But you wouldn't hear people saying that, but they will say it about EDM, which is really unfair and very biased. It's true that a lot of genres in EDM, like dubstep for example, are definitely not as popular as what they used to be. And, that's why, for example, people like Skrillex are not making as much music as they used to be. Or people that make particular genres of EDM, like Kashmir, are moving on to different genres or different forms of music, or they've just stopped making music entirely, or they claim that they're taking a break, which just basically means that they've stopped. So because people that take breaks and never actually respond ever again have basically just stopped making music. The thing is, even if these genres are dying, that's not to say that I'm not going to stop. Even if these genres are dying, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop producing these particular tracks. If they're tracks that I enjoy, if they're genres that I enjoy, then I'm just going to keep making them. There's no reason for me to give up making these genres just because not a lot of people listen to them. You need someone to bring them back, and that's kind of something that I really wanted to do. I'm not going to let these genres die. If you want genres to die, then everybody has to stop making that particular genre, like completely. But that's never really going to happen. People are still making EDM, my kind of EDM today, and I'm definitely not going to let it die. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to release this album with the variations that it had, because there's a lot of variation in Blood, Sweat and Fears. There's Electro-House, there's Big Room, there's a sort of blend between Electro-House and Progressive House. There's a little bit of slap in there as well. Me personally, I just really don't want to see these genres disappear, because that, it saddens me when I see these genres sort of fading away and people saying things like this is sort of kind of outdated, or it's bringing back vibes from 2015. It's like, well, no, the genre's not dead yet, and I'm not going to let it die. So that's the direction I wanted to go with this album. A lot of people also say that EDM is a copycat genre, which is a very frustrating claim for me to hear, because technically all genres are copycat genres in theory, right? So what I mean by that is you can't claim EDM to just be a copycat genre when all that means is when people listen to other EDM tracks, we get inspiration from the stuff that we listen to. When we make new music, it has to come from genres and tracks that we've listened to previously. When I want inspiration for EDM, I listen to other tracks. I listen to EDM, I listen to Big Room, I listen to House, I listen to Slap House, and I use those tracks and I use the ideas and the melodies in those tracks to inspire me. I don't copy them directly, because the tracks that I make are not identical, like binary copies of other people's tracks. If they were, then yes, it would be a copycat genre. It really would be copied. But I don't copy tracks. I get inspired by tracks. I get ideas from tracks that I really like, and I transform them and change them and mix them in my own way. All genres, if you're someone who makes rock tracks, rock and roll, alternate rock, indie rock, then you're going to use inspiration from other alternate rock or indie rock tracks, for example. You're going to listen to other people's chord sequences, and you're going to be inspired to use those chord sequences. So it's the same thing. You could easily say, rock and roll or these particular rock tracks are a copycat genre because they're using the same chords. It's the same thing, but you won't hear people say that about those particular genres. They only love saying it about EDM because EDM sounds like it's an easy genre to make. Anyone can just make a house track. Anyone can make an EDM track, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Yes, it's easier to make EDM and house, in my opinion, but that doesn't make us, we're not people that copy genres. We're not people that copy other people's tracks. We just find it easier to make those particular genres. We don't copy anything. We use ideas. We use inspiration, the same as everyone else that makes music. So to say that EDM is a copycat genre is a little bit absurd, and is something that people actually kind of need to think about and realize that no, EDM is not a copycat genre, because as I said, if it was, then every genre would be a copycat genre, because every genre uses some form of inspiration from a previous genre. I have to question whether creating the album is a lot of effort for not a lot of reward. Is it actually worth producing an album like that based on how many monthly listeners and followers I have on Spotify? Ultimately, that doesn't really matter because, I don't really care. I've still been producing music on Spotify even when I had less than 10 followers and 10 monthly listeners. So I've definitely come a long way in where I am on Spotify. And right now I am at my peak. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to say something like, releasing an album right now doesn't make a lot of sense. I will admit it's harder to promote an EDM album than an EP or a single because most promotional services prefer it if you just give them a single, and it is just harder to give everybody loads and loads of different tracks. But ultimately the album wasn't too much effort to create, and the rewards, it doesn't matter if they're not that great because I still enjoyed producing the album anyway. I'm not ready to see my favourite genres die. But unfortunately, as a producer and as someone with only 5,000 monthly listeners, I'm not exactly a big enough influence to save them. I'm not a big enough influence to bring the genres back to life and get everybody listening to EDM once and for all, or just listening to EDM for the next 10 years or whatever. So that's my biggest fear when it comes to the genres that I make and the music that I make. I don't want to see these genres that I make die. And there's not a lot I can do about it because even with just, 8 tracks that involve EDM, even if I've worked with people, actually trying to bring back EDM as one individual is very, very hard. All I'm doing is just getting people to listen to my album. Is it influencing how many people listen to EDM? Is it influencing the ability to bring back EDM? Probably not. But regardless, it's still really enjoyable for me to make. And I still get a lot of motivation to make EDM from the people that listen to my stuff and sort of help guide me forward. So ultimately, I am not going to worry too much about losing the ability to produce EDM or not wanting to produce EDM because not a lot of people are listening to it anymore. There will always be plenty of people, even if the genre is not as popular as what it was before, people will still want to listen to EDM and they will still enjoy the stuff that I produce. So that's going to be it for this episode of Mind the Music. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm going to leave a lot of links to the album in the description. You can listen to Blood, Sweat and Fears on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, Google Play, Pandora, Amazon Music and a bunch of other services. Thanks everybody for listening and I will see you all soon. Bye.